Octopus.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kagonya, and I am a HCI researcher. So basically what that means is that I'm in the field of human-computer interaction. So as a HCI researcher, what I do is, investigate how it's at a nexus of computer engineering on one side, design on the other side, and social sciences that allow us to really understand human behavior. So today I'm going to talk about an Afrocentric lens. I'm going to propose an Afrocentric lens to gamification. And this lens is stemmed from research that I did during my PhD. And I'm going to talk about that research, some insights, and then I'll end with, a provocation to you gamers. So the motivation behind my research, when technology design influences what users know about the world and how they construct that knowledge. Basically, what this means is that how you design technology will influence how the users of that technology understand themselves in the world, what they know about the world, or even what they view about the world, right? Let me give an example. Say, right now with social media, the content on social media will influence what you know about, say, a particular country or a particular thing. Social media can be designed to have text only, video only, a combination of all of them. So how you perceive the world is really influenced by that technology. And so designers have a very critical role in technology because they can influence how users know about the world and how they construct that knowledge. Secondly, how designers understand and prioritize certain ways of knowing over others influences how technologies are designed for people within a given context. What I mean by this is, say, and I'm sure some of you had very rife discussions like in AI around how some algorithms end up disenfranchising some communities because when they were creating those algorithms, they did not test all communities. So there are algorithms that are even biased against African women because they did not include African women that are testing those technologies. So even for designers and programmers, it becomes quite critical to understand there's inherent bias in these systems and to ensure that even when they're designing and building and programming these systems, they need to prioritize, or they need to understand what are they prioritizing and what are they excluding. So this was the premise, the motivation for my PhD, and I'm very keen on knowledge. I like to, I always know that knowledge is what it's going to influence and spark creativity, even in technology design. So I decided to focus on indigenous knowledge. So a bit about me. So I'm from Kenya and I'm from the Luhya tribe. So in African countries, we still associate greatly with tribes. It's part of our identity. I live in Nairobi. I'm from the Luhya tribe. I'm a researcher. I'm a computer engineer. It's just part of my identity. So I wanted to understand then, how can we support these communities like ours that still associate with tribe and now call them indigenous communities for the purpose of this conversation? How do we allow them to continue to nurture their culture, right? Because, time keeps changing, culture evolves, and these communities, because they want to live out and practice their culture, how can we support that in this world of today? So I was looking at how video-mediated communication technologies can be designed to support transnationals in cultivating the indigenous knowledge of their homeland while they live elsewhere in the world. By transnationals, I mean people who live away from their land of origin. So say when I was living and studying in Australia, I was a transnational because I'm Kenyan living and studying there. So if I'm interested in knowing more about the Luhya tribe and I'm cooking more Luhya food, for example, how am I going to learn that when I'm far away from the homeland, right? And so that's what my PhD was around. Now, in doing my PhD, I proposed that for us to, one of the outputs of that was that if we want to design technology that can support these transnationals who are living away from their land to learn or to engage in knowledge, we need to apply what we call the PPP Lens. So PPP Lens, because clearly all of them start with P. I was quite fortunate to get words that all start with P. So indigenous knowledge is viewed in three ways. People are viewed as knowledge. What this means here is that a lot of the culture, a lot of African culture is now carried by the people who lived it and practiced it out. So mostly those are like elders in society. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our histories, and in Africa and African countries who were colonized. So we had our rife cultures, and then colonization came in, which brought in a new culture to our way of living. And this stopped a lot of the culture before, right? A lot of the practices before, a lot of the knowledge before. So the remnants of that are the people who actually experienced it pre-colonial period. So people as knowledge. Second one is place as knowledge. Place is a very important aspect for African communities because we like to associate to the homeland. So again, back to my example, I live in Nairobi, as I mentioned, but if someone asks me, where are you from? I'll not say Nairobi. I'll say the land where my tribe hails from, because that's how, again, we identify with. So associating technology to that place where the culture is, meant, is like the source of that culture, quote unquote, is quite critical to allowing people to extend or to learn about the culture. Then the last one is praxis as knowledge. So this means learning by doing. There are different ways to learn. There are different ways to acquire knowledge. One of them is learning by doing, and I really focused on this. So this study that I did was now with elders in Kenya. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of ladies, and they were very, exciting and interesting. And here they're teaching the learners who are on the other side of this video conferencing call. They're teaching them how to make baskets, so from scratch. So, how do you weave? And the three of them. But what's beautiful about this sessions is that they were not just about teaching the craft, it was the stories around it. So like one lady would be like, oh, Susan, you remember we came to your wedding and then we carried this basket this way. Oh, and that day when we went to the market, you carried it. So it's all about not just the skill you're learning, but the context around it. And this was done in Kenya because again, trying to ensure that the place where an action normally happens is included in how that lesson or that the sharing of that knowledge is involved. Then here we can see just other pictures here which show, like this lady here is teaching, how to make a particular meal. And the lady at the bottom is how to grind maize. And the ones on the right are also how to dig. As you can see, I'm sure you're seeing there's someone who's holding technology up, right? Holding this tablet up. So this, I would want to call them like this. You could see this as like a moving tripod, because one of the interesting things is that, like even the example above, when you go to the villages and they're teaching you a certain craft, they do an action where the action is meant to be carried out. So I'll give the example of milk. So one of the elders, Lucy, she was trying to teach the students, across the internet, teaching them how to milk a cow. Basically, milking a cow, it's just not just go straight to the cow and milk it. You start by feeding the cow. So she goes to the farm, cuts napier grass, then walks to where the cow is, feeds the cow, milks the cow, takes the milk, then goes to a kitchen, and the kitchens are usually a separate housing unit from the rest of the house. Goes to the kitchen, prepares the tea, then serves the tea in the main house. You see all this movement? That's what I call a moving classroom. So we needed to facilitate the moving classroom, and we did that by having a research assistant follow the elders around. And I'll come back to this point because it's quite critical. Then here you can see the learners were this is a picture of the room they're watching from, and you can see the learners are mostly just watching. So in some sessions they're watching only, in others they're also doing as they're learning, right? So they're seeing the weaving, and then also in Melbourne, they're now trying to weave. Yeah, so they learn, and they'll be like, oh, am I doing it okay? Then they'll be like, no, you need to turn it this way and twist it that way. So these are just pictures of how that happened. Now, the technology I used to ensure that these sessions were, again, aligning with people as knowledge, place as knowledge, practice as knowledge. People, live sessions, group of elders, group of learners. Place as knowledge, the elders were on the homeland and they're performing the actions where the actions are normally carried out. Then praxis, I'm learning by doing. And if you can see this picture here, there's two tablets, and by use of a 360 camera, the students are able to swivel around the environment to give them a stronger sense of presence. I'm just going to jump to the findings now, and I'm going to highlight just three because of time. The moving classroom is quite critical here. We needed to facilitate a moving classroom because the elders prefer to just, teach in a way that there's no, they don't have to think about the technology. The technology is invisible. They want it to be hands-free and framing-free. So by framing free, I know all of us take selfies, you want to get the best angle, zoom in, zoom out. They don't want to do that. They just want to focus on what they're teaching and they want to focus on who they're talking to, people, right? And so we needed, when I was thinking around how then well, how can we have it? What technology can we use to allow someone to roam, around a large piece of, a large area without having to think of technology? And so that's why I decided to use 360-degree video cameras, and that afforded 360-degree video conferencing, which is it was quite a novel. 360 video conferencing was quite novel at the time I was doing my PhD. So this allowed for the elders to roam around the land without caring about technology. And then on the other end, the learners can swivel, across. They can, interact with their mobile devices and be able to see what the elders are doing. The second point is group teaching. The other exciting thing is that there was no prep work. You tell the elders, what are you going to teach the students today? And they're like, we're going to teach them how to make ugali. And it's not that they're going to write a curriculum and then know at minute 7 you're going to say this. No, these sessions were very simultaneous and spontaneous, but yet they were coordinated. They knew how to coordinate the sessions amongst themselves while the session is going on. So coordination on the fly. So group teaching, coordination on the fly was one of the key themes in these sessions. Then a communal-led personalized experience of the session. So traditionally, usually learning occurs in groups. So the learners are a group of learners and a group of elders. But people need both a communal feel and a personalized one. I am a member of a community, but I'm also an individual. So using technology to ensure we facilitate and mediate this. So importance of that is that each person needs to build their own memories, learnings, and experiences of knowledge. So we facilitated that by allowing you now to have your own device. You can add, you can explore the land on your own device, but you're still in the group. You're still with someone else in that in the room, so you still get that communal feel. And this is quite key because the good thing with that is that you have a shared soundscape, meaning that all of you are listening to the same thing from the elders, but you're looking at different things. So it's communal because you get the shared experience and shared soundscape, but it's personalized because you can be roaming. If you go back to this picture, the lady on the left is looking at something different from the lady on the right, and the soundscape is the same. They're both listening to the elders at the same time. And so that even was helpful in the curation of the sessions, because someone would ask, oh, what's going on there in the farm, And then the elder would, of course, respond. The elders would respond. So it even makes the sessions much more engaging. Here I'll just touch on one point, the visible backstage. And if we think about front stage and backstage, say you go watch a play. So I guess back pre-COVID, when you could actually, go watch plays and movies much more often than you can now, there's a front stage where the actors come to the front and they perform, they give you a performance. But the backstage is where the hard work goes on, the preparation, the makeup, there's a lot of activity there. And there's a beauty in having a front stage and a backstage, because you want to hide all this prep from your audience so that by the time you come to the front stage, you're prepared. However, in these sessions, the backstage is visible because, as I said, the teaching sessions were spontaneous, they were simultaneous. So then how would the elders get this backstage, yet you can see them on the front stage? They used the second language. So most of the elders were multilingual. So say if we're teaching in Kiswahili, then they switched to their tribal language to say, oh, you know what, you need to talk about this, or show them how to, really weave that like this. So they're finessing the sessions on the fly, using a different language as a back channel while they're teaching the sessions to the learners, because most of the learners do not understand, that tribal language. And so the beauty here and the provocation it does then to technology design is when you think about translation is not always the automatic solution to understanding each other. We need to understand that there's a beauty in creating a back channel, which can allow people then to finesse their craft, even as they're trying to do something else. So now, with all these findings and learnings, then what provocation do we have for design? So the provocation for design, of course, first is that the PPP Lens, the People-Place-Praxis lens as a tool for design. And when we're thinking of designing technologies, we need to ensure that they mediate all these three. So people, physical, social, situated, and physical interactions, face-to-face interactions, because you want to associate with, a living source of knowledge. So that live interaction is very, very key for these sessions. That's why we ensure that the elders and the learners had this live interaction. The live interaction also allowed the crafting of the classes as they went on. So that's why we had them live and not recorded and then, shown later, because the content of the session is determined by the people in the session, right? So how do we design technologies to ensure that they can mediate all these three at once? Then we talked about, so one of the things that's critical here is that the indigenous epicentres, usually the flows of knowledge, and I think I'll just put these 2 points together. Usually knowledge currently in this world flows from, the global north to the global south. A lot of the technologies used in this phone that I use here, it wasn't really created in me in mind, right? So the studies and the research and the design was done in the global north, and then probably production was done in Asia, and then it was brought for us to use here. How about thinking about how we can create technologies that reverse this order, where we actually investigate these rural communities, investigate these indigenous communities, investigate these African communities, and then build technologies for them, with them, so that the technologies that they use are very much closer to their context. So this is why this tool or this lens is really Afrocentric, because it was factored and it was, I generated it while investigating communities here. Then supporting not only written literacy, but bodily and oral literacy. So, when you're driving a car, like even today I was going to a new place and I was like, oh, I might get lost because I'd only been to this place once before. Then my friend told me, no, your body will take you there. Your memory will remember, your body will remember. When you're riding a bike, you can't really say that how are you riding that bike the second time? It's like your body has knowledge. So how do you support this? Because in these indigenous communities and traditional communities, they really believe a lot in bodily literacy. So how are we mediating that? So that's, a provocation for us. Then finally, when we look at now these sessions, so I call them VMIC sessions. So that's video mediated indigenous knowledge sessions. So these are the sessions that I created when I was using 360 video to support elders and teaching learners. Use of 360 video is very important. As I said before, it allows the elders not to think about technology. Put the camera in the middle and they can roam around and they can engage with the learners without thinking about technology. Then for audio, one of the propositions is, you can, of course, you can have your Bluetooth headphones or earphones, so you can still have that interaction with the learners. So this again was quite key for me, because the sessions needed to be live and on the land, right? Because you're teaching not only about the craft, but also about the land. And this facilitated this. Then mediating a feeling of apparent mobility. This again was quite key, because you want the learners to move around and ask, like, what's that tree? What's that plant over there? Those fruits, what are they? What do you do with those fruits? So they can move around the place, yet they're in Melbourne and the elders are in Kenya. So you're allowing them to move around the place and learn as they're moving around. So it's apparent, because they're not really physically moving around, but they're moving around, of course, moving around the place thanks to the technology that's being used. Then also we have here, facilitating the individual yet communal experience. Again, this is something that we need to think about when we're designing. So how do we allow people to be individuals, but also members of a community, especially in places where being a member of a community is quite critical. Here in African countries, you're a member of a tribe, but even anywhere, you can be a member of, a group of scientists. You can be a member of, you associate as maybe you're a woman, right? Or you can associate as maybe a member of the technologists in school. So people belong to communities. So how do we allow someone to be a member of a community, but also be an individual? Technology, as we create technology, we really need to think about that. And finally, allowing for presence to be mediated through exploration and communication. What I mean by this is that so in these sessions, what I observed is that some learners wanted to explore this, the remote place with guidance. So the elder would say, okay, now I'm going to the kitchen. And so you see them now moving the screen to the kitchen. That's one set. Now the others just wanted to do it without the communication guide. In other words, even if the elder is going to the kitchen, they still want to be looking at the farm and they want to be looking at different places. So you need to allow for these two types of engagement so that people can explore, but also, and not really lean too much on the guidance, but also there are those who really want to lean a lot on the guidance. So that's how they can learn, right? So allowing presence, and how this mediated a feeling of presence is that constant back and forth between the elders and the learners, whether it's communicating or even just engaging with the land, made them feel like they were there. And by mediating that feeling of presence, it really cultivates a condition where now there's more learning and engagement going on. So these are some of the, I call them design provocations, because I was just thinking around, so what does this mean for gaming? You know, what does this mean? This means that when we're thinking about the new games that we're going to create, we should consider, you know, how can we mediate everything at once? Now, social interactions, situated interactions, and physical interactions. Can we create games that do all these at once? Can we support knowledge coming from different epicenters? And by knowledge coming from different epicenters, this affects the content of the game, right? A priority of maybe in one epicenter of knowledge, maybe the priority there or the everyday experience there is that maybe they just love, I don't know, like let's say maybe food, a particular food. So the content is going to be influenced by the content of the game or the product or the technology. If it's created for that community, it means it has to have a lot of food, right? Then supporting flows, of course, from rural to urban, and then supporting other literacies, you know, body literacy, oral literacy. There's one community, I forget which one it was. I believe it's a Southern African community. And what is interesting is when they speak, it's not just about what is said, but how the mouth is shaped, right? So it really adds another nuance to how languages are spoken and how languages are, you know, how information is exchanged. So when we design technologies only to recognize speech or written literacy, we're completely marginalizing other ways that some communities communicate. Then now back to the other sessions, you know, how do you mediate apparent mobility? How do you facilitate individual yet communal experiences? And then, of course, how do you allow for exploration and communication to take place at the same time? So when I was thinking about this, I'm like, what comes to mind when I try and imagine a game that has all this, or at least a lot of these? Guess which one I thought about? Pokemon Go. Because I remember Pokemon Go, you know, it got guys really, really crazy. They're running around. I remember I was in Melbourne at the time, and you're just walking on your own business, and someone's like, oh my gosh, right behind you. And of course, there's nothing. But of course, it's because they're, you know, viewing the same place we're on, but through their screen. The reason I like this game, and the reason I related it now a lot to PPP, is because place. Allow people to interact a lot with, you know, the physical area. I mean, a lot with space and place. People, of course, it's a social game. And then practice. You're moving around, you're working around, you're grabbing something, you're pointing to something. So I was thinking, if we can have more games like this, you know, using the PPP lens, I think it would be quite beneficial, especially in context of learning. How to gamify learning? And this could, I offer that this is one of the ways that we can gamify learning, by having a lens, even in the creation of these games and then investigation of these games, that forces us to really think about social interactions, situated interactions, and physical interactions. So I want to leave some time for questions. And yes, so kindly questions and comments are very welcome. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, I can't hear you, Sam. I believe you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yes.
Kagonya, thanks so much. Super inspiring and wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it a lot. Raised for me lots of questions. I mean, we've had a conversation earlier this week in the context of our seminar, so you're kind of, I think, probably familiar with the things that interest me and interest us at the Institute. One of the things being what we perceive as a dominance of a kind of set of ideologies which are issued from Silicon Valley and through the technologies which we all use. What really struck a chord with me was this idea you talk about of reversing the flow of technology, reversing the flow of knowledge, exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, I have been thinking within the context of gamification that the way in which gamification seems to be most spread at the moment is in the usage of games to increase productivity, often harnessing, and it's kind of an understanding of games which kind of revolves around competition. So that's very much a game as opposed to playing. What I would ask you is, I mean, it's a kind of an open question, but in order to reverse the flow of knowledges, and the way you also talked about how knowledge is practiced and passed on in the Luyu community, which you're referring to, is there a way that kind of pedagogical practice, a kind of teaching, which doesn't involve like bullet point learning, this kind of embodied knowledge, and also a kind of a transfer of knowledge from one generation to another, like these sorts of existing cultural practices, do you think, how could they be involved also in sort of the digital interfaces or digital mechanisms which we're kind of constantly using today? I hope that's clear.
Yes.
A little bit. Yeah.
Excellent question. Excellent question. And I'll touch on a point that you mentioned in terms of how do these games operate, right? And you talked about, say, there's ranking systems. So you're number 1, number 2, number 3, number 5. Now, to examine, so if the end goal is to increase someone's productivity, and hence, you give them the badges or you give them the ranking, we now ask ourselves, how is productivity encouraged or increased in these indigenous epicenters? So that's the point of investigation, right? So how did these communities ensure that productivity is increased, say amongst a group of youth or whatever it is? And when we look at that, we begin to understand there are different ways of doing it. Right. And so say what was really common is that as I talked about, the learning was usually in groups. So you're always a member of your I think the clan group, right? So this is similar age. So say maybe from 12 to 14, about 10 of you are going to be put in one group. So of course there's competition, there's cooperation, there's collaboration, but how productivity is encouraged that we are all going to move together. So now imagine designing a game based on this behavior. It will look very different. The ranking will not be like this. The ranking will be, we are only as good as the weakest link, a very common thing that is said. And so it ensures that you help each other can all succeed, as opposed to being better than the other person. So even in that, it means that if we look at these ways of living and ways of doing, and we base this technology design based on that culture, it's going to look completely different from technology design from another culture. So that's actually how we can build technologies based on the ways of living and ways of doing of particular, areas or communities or geographies. And actually, that's why I love HCI, because as I said, HCI is a combination of, the computer engineering part, where it's the AI and the software development, and there's everything. The design, so how do you design that technology? How does it work? What's the user experience? But a lot of it is, how do you understand? Who are you building it for? What are they doing? What do they value as knowledge? What do they value as not knowledge? What are the ways of living, ways of being? What is their identity, and ways of knowing and learning? So when you start here, and then you base the design based on that, and then of course now you create the algorithms and moods and all stuff based on that. So even so that's how it's inspired, and that's how we can actually involve a lot of first we can involve different epicenters, so not only the global north, but also the global south, by realizing those are legitimate sources of knowledge. Like these ways of living and being and doing might be extremely different from what's in the global north, but they are real. These are real people. We're real people. We're real communities. These are real patterns of life. And this is real knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation. And we can use this as a source of knowledge and a source of inspiration and a source of motivation for technology design. So that's the first step, just legitimizing that these are epicenters of knowledge that are legitimate, they're valid, they are true sources of knowledge. Then based on that, building technology from that point of view, or from these sources of knowledge. And I tell you, the technologies will be completely different, because then you're looking at this, you're looking at the world, but from a completely different lens. Yeah.
Definitely. And I mean, yeah, I'm fully supportive of, and I think I don't think that I'm kind of, I don't really know how to articulate it, but I completely agree on like 150% on everything. And it's so nice to hear this articulated in such a sort of I don't even need to be convinced, but such a clear way. My question would be, like you said, like the first step is articulating this as a valid knowledge. The second step would be my next question. So how to actually negotiate with these kind of huge global, powerful platforms in the sense that we can actually start to push these things through into being accepted and embraced actually on a kind of commercial or like on a bigger level, like beyond the research field. And I know that you're very enmeshed in different companies and have lots of experience in the Nairobi scene. How is it in your experience to kind of, how receptive are companies from the US, for example, to your arguments and to your research and to the logic which you're just articulating today?
Yeah. Great question also. So personally, in my experience, I've had great support for the work I was doing. In fact, one of the things that surprised me, but it was a great surprise, I was like, I'm going all the way to Australia to do, a research, and my PhD is all around Africa. So I was like, will they even accept me to go to do this work? But of course they did. So there are institutions, there are companies, there are organizations that recognize that indeed the world is the world, and we have to accommodate everything in the world. And so they would accommodate that. This is a place where we can learn and grow from. I think a really other vital step is that it's now up to, say, like, African communities or African technologists, African designers, African researchers to do more work and research on the continent, because it's very little known. Did you know that on Wikipedia, only 1% of the information in Wikipedia is about Africa, and most of that content is written by non-Africans? Quite interesting, isn't it? And so then what can we do about it, right? We need to have more people investigating more about the continent. That's one thing. The other thing is, now from that can stem new technologies. So people need to, we need to create more technologies that solve local problems, and by that now you have more Afrocentric technologies. Then when it comes to this important collaboration with now, of course, companies or institutions from different parts of the world, the key word there is collaboration, and then finding channels and avenues and understanding that, because unfortunately, with the imbalances of power, you need that person who's going to hold up the microphone for you. Like even my research it got better viewership and readership because I went to university in Australia and I was going for conferences, in the States and Canada and wherever. And that audience is very, very different from an audience compared to an audience of, say, my peers here in Africa. It's a very small audience. But that collaboration and then working with people who are already in those circles, or giving me a seat at that table, allows now my work to be listened to by more audiences, or the research that we're doing to be listened to by more audiences. So it's all about collaboration, and that was not too difficult, I guess, because I did find many communities that were supportive. Then also in terms of the technologies or innovations that we have, M-Pesa is one of our most proud Kenyan technologies, right? And mobile money, Africa is way ahead in terms of mobile money. But it's interesting that when we think about the word defining how many people are banked, officially, because we think of a bank as Standard Chartered or Stanbic, or that the traditional bank would say that maybe Africa's banked economy. I think for Kenya it was probably less than 20%. I don't know the exact figure. But if we look at the people on M-Pesa, it's the whole population. So even these terms that are very much Eurocentric, they have to change, because we are all banked, because mobile money allows you to have a bank account, but the bank account is associated with your mobile phone number. So we again have to recognize that this different way of doing things, it still gives us the same thing. Someone can withdraw money, send money, use it to pay, the same thing that a credit card does, the M-Pesa wallet does. It's that there are so many other technologies that probably get less airtime or are less known about, but they meet and they fit the local needs. And these work. So by now even talking more about these technologies or having them more known, then it allows for more support now, or even more like funding to come to the continent. There's more collaboration and cooperation, because they're like, this actually works here. We've leapfrogged a bunch of technologies on the ground, and this again allows for that. And lastly, and quite importantly, understanding that there's commercial opportunity. Yeah. At the end of the day, corporations, what they want to do, people want to make money. But you see, seeing us as this, just black, just a black blank continent is not beneficial, because people here spend money. I have spent money to eat today, but if you brought me a food I didn't like, I'm not going to eat it. So using that same analogy, of course, if you give us technologies that do not meet our needs and not reflective of what we do every day, why are you going to buy it? But if you do come with an M-Pesa solution, we pay a lot to send money using M-Pesa. If you compare even the rates that we pay on M-Pesa compared to other bank rates, these ones are much higher, but people are using them. You know, Safaricom is a very profitable company because of M-Pesa. So basically, people will spend money when you are on things that make them happy and things that solve their problems. But to do that, you need to understand those people and build for those for technologies that solve those problems. So it's a very long answer.
No. It was a kind of a super complicated and not very well articulated question, so thanks for that. I guess my last question, and it's actually I'm really glad that you introduced the idea of banking and M-Pesa and money, and also its corollary debt, because that's actually what our next presentation will be about.
Yes.
But before we go on to that, my last question would be a little bit. I mean, my question was geared towards support, like outside support, financial support, and I was also based on a conversation we'd had previously where we talked about where the VC, the venture capital, is coming from that supports sorts of Kenyan innovations. I wanted to ask also about financial support and investment from within Kenya. So I know that Bitenge Ndemo has played an important role in innovation in the broader sense in the Kenyan tech scene in the past. How does it look today? Is there money coming from government? Is there money coming from local venture capital? Because there is there's a group of Kenyans who are extremely wealthy, and how's that money being invested? Is it being invested in local tech, or is it being invested in more traditional sort of land? Or are you getting support from Kenyan money?
Yes, and I like that you brought the aspect of land, because I was going to start from there. So the wealth Kenyans, yes, you know, because again, our tribal association land is quite a central subject in terms of our, you know, definition of self. And so you're right, when people get money, the first investment is, I'm going to buy much more land, I'm going to own many more houses, but mostly land. But the narrative is changing because now it's like, especially when you look at, I mean, how much more land do you want to own? And on top of this layer, you know, sitting on top of this layer is then what are you going to do with it? For you to make money on it, you need to do lots of things. And underlying that or underpinning that is technology. So there have been a few deliberate efforts to change people's understanding of where they can put their money at. And one of them is, why don't you invest in technology and technology companies? So this is ongoing. In very small pockets, I've seen it in very, very small pockets, but I'm glad that it's ongoing locally. The second thing is with VC funding. In Africa, so last financial year, we've seen a huge increase in VC funding, and Kenya and Nigeria are the top countries in Africa. It's like in the millions of dollars now. And the reason for this, I think, is now that the networks. So in terms of the diasporans, you know, who went to study abroad and then they come back and they want to build technologies for the continent, and they still have those networks that they created when they were in institutions and schools. Like, say, I went to Carnegie Mellon, then I went to University of Melbourne. And so now when you find those VC funding bodies that are associated with those schools, it becomes much easier. And that's how the flows come in. So you're just reaching out to your networks. If you worked in one of these Fortune 500 companies, you reach out to those networks, and then that's one of the ways that money comes in. So that's really, really growing. And I was very happy to read the other day that even during the COVID period, so, you know, the COVID we're still in, VC funding has increased, like it's quite exponential. The growth is quite exponential. And I predict that this is just going to continue increasing. So the first avenue is now through these networks, because you start with the people you know, and you know, these networks are now getting more interested in the continent. But then secondly, and interestingly, especially in Nigeria, it is the Nigerians who are putting money into the tech companies. The diaspora Nigerians are putting more money into those tech companies. We need to be ready as Kenyans. We need to learn a lot from that. And so other countries also need to do that. But it's a lot of the Nigerians putting money into those companies. And so that to me, again, was quite encouraging. And then lastly, not even locally. So we've talked about like government, we've talked about local companies. Now even they are introduced, many companies have an arm that is looking, at least the big companies, they have a department or an arm that's looking into local innovation. The government has increased funding for businesses started by the youth, so those ones of under 25. They're very deliberate about that. Whether it's in research, whether it's actually in businesses, exploration. So again, that is increasing. So while it's not as much as I think it could be, I've definitely seen that both from outside, VC funding from foreign investors, VC funding from local investors, and then even just governments. It is okay. It has actually significantly increased.
Actually, there are more questions, but unfortunately we've run out of time. There were also some questions from the Twitch chat, but maybe what I'll do, I'll collect that and pass it on, because I know you can't join us for the Q&A at the end.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
But just to know that like there are sort of questions coming up in the Twitch chat as well, and also lots of compliments and support for your presentation from our viewers. So just to pass that on, because I know what you can see is just basically me
Yes.
and the Discord interface. So
I can't see you guys.
yeah, exactly.
But thank you very much. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you too so much. Sorry we've run out of time. I really hope we can continue these conversations in other formats, in other fora as well. And
yes.
From all of us at NETSA and from the Academy of the Arts of the World and from the Twitch channel, we'd like to say thanks so much. And we will look forward to the next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, the audience. It's so great to have these conversations with you. And thank you very much for even allowing me to speak on this. I'm very passionate about it. And it's just great to have the questions. Happy to answer them later. And yeah, let's continue engaging on various fora.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we will be back to our viewers. We'll be back in about 1 minute. We're just going to do a quick switch over, and our next discussant is Bethuel Mouze, BM, who will be talking about debt in its broadest possible sense.